Rain slicked the streets of Manhattan, turning the yellow cabs into blurred streaks of gold under the relentless downpour. Victoria slammed her apartment door shut, the echo bouncing off the high ceilings like a gunshot in her chest. She dropped her briefcase, the leather thudding against the hardwood, and collapsed onto the couch, her silk blouse clinging to her skin from the sudden storm that had caught her mid-stride from the subway. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, an insistent vibration that pulled her from the edge of numbness. It was her assistant. Probably another crisis at the firm. Another merger that demanded her soul on a silver platter. But she ignored it, letting the rain patter against the floor-to-ceiling windows like fingers tapping for entry. 35 years old. Partner at one of the city's most cutthroat law firms. And what did she have to show for it? A view of the park that she never enjoyed. A closet full of power suits that felt more like armor than fabric. And a heart that had been filing motions for divorce in her mind long before she signed the papers 2 years ago. She rubbed her temples, the migraine blooming like a bruise under her skin. The divorce had been clean. Clinical. The way she handled everything. Mark had moved to Chicago for a new job. And she had stayed, telling herself it was for the career. For the stability. But nights like this, when the city lights flickered like distant fires, she wondered if stability was just another word for stagnation. Her shoulders ached. Knotted from hours hunched over depositions. From carrying the weight of boardrooms where she was the only woman in the room. The only one who had to prove her fire twice over. A sigh escaped her lips. Long and ragged. As if exhaling the day's poison. She needed release. Something beyond the gym sessions that left her more exhausted or the wine that dulled but never dissolved the tension. Her eyes drifted to the flyer on the kitchen counter. Half buried under takeout menus. Urban Oasis Massage. Let go of tomorrow's stress today. Charlotte's name was signed at the bottom in looping script. From that one time a colleague had dragged her to a pop-up wellness event last month. The therapist had been kind. Her hand steady. Her voice a soft anchor in the chaos of small talk. Victoria picked up her phone before she could talk herself out of it. The call connected on the second ring. Urban Oasis? Charlotte speaking. The voice was warm. Like honey stirred into chamomile tea. Wrapping around the edges of Victoria's frayed nerves. It's Victoria Hale. From the event last month. I need an appointment. Now. If possible. Her words tumbled out sharper than intended. Laced with the exhaustion she couldn't mask. A pause on the line. Then a gentle hum. I can squeeze you in. My last slot tonight is open. Come as you are. The cab ride blurred into a haze of neon and wet asphalt. The driver's radio crooning some old Sinatra tune about New York. New York. Victoria paid with a nod. Stepping out into the drizzle that had softened to a mist. The studio was tucked above a bodega on the Upper West Side. Its door marked by a simple brass plaque that gleamed under the street lamp. She climbed the narrow stairs. Her heels clicking like accusations. And knocked. Charlotte opened the door. Her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Strands escaping like whispers. She wore a simple white tunic over leggings. The fabric soft against her frame. And her green eyes lit with a quiet recognition. Victoria. Right on time. Come in. Out of the wet. The room was a sanctuary carved from the city's frenzy. Low lights from Himalayan salt lamps cast amber glows on the walls. And the air hummed with the faint scent of lavender and eucalyptus. A massage table draped in crisp linens dominated the center, flanked by shelves of oils and candles that flickered like secrets. Soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. Strings weaving through the space like threads of calm. Make yourself comfortable, Charlotte said. Her voice steady as she turned to prepare the oils. Face down. If that suits you. We'll start with your shoulders. They look like they're carrying the world. Victoria stripped down to her undergarments behind the rice paper screen, folding her clothes with the precision of someone who measured her life in billable hours. She slid onto the table, the sheet cool against her skin, and buried her face in the cradle. The vulnerability hit her then. A quiet wave that made her breath hitch. She was exposed. Not just in body but in the raw ache she couldn't litigate away. Charlotte's hands found her back first. Light pressure at the base of her spine. Thumbs circling in slow, deliberate arcs. Breathe with me, she murmured. Her touch a bridge between stranger and confidant. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Let it go. The first press into her trapezius drew a gasp from Victoria. The knot there unyielding as granite. But Charlotte didn't flinch. Didn't rush. Her fingers worked deeper. Peeling back layers with a patience that felt foreign. Almost intimate. Minutes stretched. The rain outside fading to a distant murmur. And Victoria felt the first crack. A warmth seeping through the ice of her muscles. "Tell me about your day," Charlotte said softly. Her voice a gentle prod as she moved to the shoulders. Oil slicking her palms with jasmine essence. Victoria hesitated. Her cheek pressed against the cushion. The usual. Contracts that could sink ships. Clients who think ethics are optional. A pause. Her breath evening out. And an ex-husband who texts about the weather like it's code for something more. Charlotte's hand stilled for a beat. Then resumed. Firmer now. Chasing a stubborn ridge along Victoria's scapula. Sounds heavy. But you're here now. That's a start. The session unfolded like a slow unraveling. Charlotte's touch mapped the topography of Victoria's tension. From the sharp peaks of her neck to the valleys of her lower back. Each stroke coaxed a sigh from Victoria. Unbidden. Her body betraying the guard she kept so tightly wound. She felt seen. Not as the shark in the suit but as the woman beneath. Frayed and fierce. As Charlotte worked the sides of her arms. Her fingers brushed the sensitive skin near Victoria's ribs. Eliciting a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill. "You're holding so much," Charlotte whispered. Almost to herself. What would it feel like to set it down? Victoria turned her head slightly. Catching a glimpse of Charlotte's profile in the mirror across the room. The therapist's brow was furrowed in concentration. Lips parted in quiet focus. And something stirred in Victoria's chest. A flutter she hadn't felt since college summers by the lake. Before ambition swallowed her whole. The hour ended too soon. The music looping back to its beginning. Victoria sat up slowly. The sheet pooling around her waist. Her skin humming with residual warmth. Charlotte handed her a glass of water. Their fingers brushing in the exchange. A spark that lingered in the air like static. "That was more than I expected," Victoria said. Her voice huskier than usual. Pulling on her blouse with hands that still trembled faintly. Charlotte smiled. Tucking a stray hair behind her ear. Her eyes holding Victoria's with an intensity that bordered on bold. "Sometimes the body knows what the mind forgets. Call me if you need another session. Or just to talk." Victoria nodded. The city's pulse calling her back through the door. But as she descended the stairs. The rain now a soft veil. She felt lighter. Unburdened. As if one touch had rewritten the map of her solitude. The next morning dawned crisp. The park below her window alive with joggers and dog walkers chasing the sun. Victoria's alarm blared at 5. As always. But she silenced it with a groan. Lingering in the tangle of sheets. Her body ached in the best way. Echoes of Charlotte's hands ghosting over her skin. She dressed in her armor. A charcoal pantsuit that hugged her frame like a second skin. And headed to the office. The subway's rumble a familiar lullaby. The firm was a glass tower on Park Avenue. All sharp angles and whispered deals. Her office overlooked the avenue. Files stacked like fortifications on her desk. By noon. She was deep in arbitration prep. Her pen flying across pages. But her mind wandered to the night before. To the way Charlotte's voice had wrapped around her name like a promise. A knock interrupted her reverie. It was Elena. Her paralegal. With coffee and a stack of briefs. "You look rested," Elena said. Arching a brow as she set down the mug. "Miracle worker?" Victoria sipped the steaming liquid. The bitterness grounding her. Something like that. She dove back into work. But the afternoon dragged. Meetings blurring into one another. Each voice a drone against the memory of that quiet room. By evening. The decision crystallized. She texted Charlotte before she could second-guess it. "Available tomorrow. Same time." The reply came swift. "It's a date." The second session was in the same haven. But the air felt charged. Expectant. Victoria arrived early. Shedding her coat and shoes with less haste. Her pulse quickening at the sound of Charlotte's footsteps in the next room. When the door opened, Charlotte greeted her with a smile that reached her eyes. Dimples flashing like sunlight on water. "Back so soon," Charlotte teased lightly. Gesturing to the table. "Good sign or bad?" Victoria met her gaze. The vulnerability from last night still raw. "Good. I think." My shoulders are plotting a coup again. They laughed. The sound easy, breaking the ice that had formed overnight. As Victoria settled in, Charlotte's hands returned. Familiar now. Tracing paths that felt like homecomings. The oil was warmer this time. Sandalwood mingling with the lavender. And Charlotte's touch bolder. Pressing into the hollows of Victoria's collarbone with a thumb that lingered just a breath too long. Tell me something true, Charlotte said. Her voice low as she worked the knots along Victoria's spine. Not about work. About you. Victoria's breath caught. The question piercing the armor she wore even here. She stared at the blurred reflection of the candle flame in the glass bottle nearby. I used to paint, she admitted. The words slipping out like confessions. Landscapes. Mostly. Before law school swallowed me. Haven't touched a brush in years. Charlotte's fingers paused. Then resumed. Softer. Why'd you stop? A sigh? Deep and searching. Fear. Maybe. Of not being good enough. Of choosing beauty over security. The session deepened. Charlotte's hands exploring the curve of Victoria's hips. The therapist's breath syncing with her own in the quiet. Victoria felt the pull. Undeniable now. A current drawing her under. When Charlotte asked her to turn over. Their eyes locked. Green meeting hazel in a moment stretched thin. You're beautiful when you let go, Charlotte murmured. Her hands gliding over Victoria's arms. Avoiding the sheet's edge but close enough to ignite. Victoria's heart hammered. Words failing her. She reached up. Impulsive. Her fingers grazing Charlotte's wrist. The touch was electric. A circuit completing. And Charlotte didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in. Her face inches from Victoria's. The air between them thick with unspoken want. The buzzer sounded. Signaling time. Shattering the spell. Victoria dressed in a daze. Her skin alive with possibility. At the door, Charlotte pressed a card into her hand. Their fingers entwining briefly. Next time, we talk more. About painting. About everything. Victoria nodded. Stepping into the night where the city lights beckoned like stars fallen to earth. For the first time in years. Tomorrow felt like a canvas. Blank and waiting. Weeks blurred into a rhythm Victoria hadn't known she craved. Twice a month became weekly. Then more. Her calendar penciled with Oasis in discreet script. The firm noticed her edge softening. Opponents in negotiations sensing a shift. But she deflected with smiles that came easier now. Charlotte's studio became her anchor. The sessions evolving from therapy to ritual. Each touch a conversation without words. One crisp October evening. As leaves turned the park into a riot of red and gold. Victoria arrived with a bottle of Merlot tucked under her arm. For after, she said. A flush creeping up her neck as Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Ambitious, Charlotte replied. Her grin playful. But her eyes held a hunger that mirrored Victoria's own. The massage began as always. But the air hummed differently. Charged with the wine's promise and the seasons turning. Charlotte's hands were magic. Unraveling the week's toll, a hostile takeover that had her in meetings till midnight. A junior associate's tearful breakdown in the ladies' room that Victoria had soothed with quiet words. As she worked the calves, Charlotte hummed a tune. Something folkloric and haunting. Her voice vibrating through Victoria's bones. Ever been to the Berkshires? Victoria asked. Turning her head to catch Charlotte's profile. The lamplight gilding her hair. Charlotte's thumbs dug into a tight spot behind the knee. Drawing a soft moan. Once. Summers ago. Hiked the trails. Painted by the lakes. You. Never, Victoria breathed. The idea blooming like wildflowers in her mind. But I want to. Escape this concrete jungle. The session ended with Victoria sitting up. The sheet slipping as she reached for Charlotte's hand. Join me. Next weekend. We could drive up. Find a cabin. Paint. Or just breathe. Charlotte's fingers laced with hers. Warm and sure. I'd like that. More than like. The drive north was a revelation. The I-87 ribboning through suburbs that gave way to rolling hills dusted with frost. Victoria's Audi hummed along. The radio tuned to indie folk. Sarah Jarosz's voice weaving tales of lost loves and found roads. Charlotte sat shotgun. Her bare feet on the dash. Skirt hiked up against the heater's blast. Pointing out hawks wheeling overhead. Freedom looks good on you, Charlotte said. Her hand resting on Victoria's thigh. casual yet claiming. Victoria glanced over. The roads curved, demanding her eyes back. But her skin tingled under the touch. It's terrifying. But good. They arrived at the cabin as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples. The air sharp with pine and earth. It was a modest A-frame, rented on a whim through an app, overlooking a lake that mirrored the fading light. Inside, a stone fireplace crackled to life under Charlotte's hands, the wood popping like applause. Dinner was simple, pasta from a box. Sauce simmered with garlic and wine, eaten cross-legged on the rug. The Merlot flowed, loosening tongues and limbs, stories spilling like the liquid in their glasses. Charlotte spoke of her path to massage school, fleeing a corporate gig in advertising that had drained her color. I needed to touch lives, not sell them, she said. Her voice soft, eyes reflecting the fire's dance. Victoria leaned back on her elbows, the warmth seeping into her bones. And me? You touched mine first. The words hung, heavy with truth. And Charlotte set her glass down, crawling across the space between them. Their kiss was inevitable. A slow burn igniting, lips meeting with the tenderness of recognition. Charlotte tasted of wine and salt, her hands framing Victoria's face as if it were porcelain. Victoria pulled her closer, fingers tangling in blonde waves. The world narrowing to the press of bodies. The sigh that escaped as shirts fell away. They made love by the fire, shadows playing on the walls like silent witnesses. Charlotte's touch was reverent, exploring with the same care she gave in sessions, but now laced with passion, her mouth tracing paths that arched Victoria's back. Gasps filled the room, breaths mingling, bodies finding rhythm in the quiet. Victoria felt undone, remade, the vulnerability no longer a fear but a gift. After they lay entwined, the fire's embers glowing like their flushed skin. Charlotte traced lazy circles on Victoria's stomach, her head pillowed on a shoulder. This scares me, she whispered, voice raw. How much I want this. Victoria kissed her forehead, the gesture steady. Me too. But we're here. Morning brought fog rolling off the lake, muting the world to whispers. They hiked a trail Charlotte knew, boots crunching leaves, hands clasped against the chill. At a overlook, Victoria unpacked the sketchpad she'd bought on impulse, charcoal smudging her fingers as she captured the mist-shrouded trees. Charlotte watched, chin on knees, her smile a quiet sun. You're good, she said later, over coffee on the porch, steam curling like spirits. Don't stop again. Victoria set the mug down, pulling Charlotte into her lap, the chair creaking under them. With you? I won't. The weekend etched itself into memory, lazy afternoons sketching by the water, evenings of wine and whispers, nights where touch spoke louder than words. Driving back Sunday, the city looming on the horizon, Victoria felt the pull of reality. But Charlotte's hand in hers was anchor enough. Back in Manhattan, the contrast stung. Monday's boardroom was a battlefield. Voices clashing over clauses. Victoria's pen a sword. But under the table, her phone lit with Charlotte's text, miss your sketches already. Dinner tonight. A smile cracked her facade. Drawing stares. That night, they met at a hole-in-the-wall Italian on the Lower East Side. Candles flickering in Chianti bottles. The air thick with garlic and laughter. Over tiramisu. Charlotte's foot nudged hers under the table. A secret code. What now? She asked. Spoon midway to her mouth. Eyes searching. Victoria reached across, thumb brushing knuckles. We build it. Day by day. But cracks appeared. Subtle at first. A late night at the firm meant cancelled plans. Victoria's apologies terse over the phone. Charlotte understood. Her voice patient. But Victoria heard the strain. The unspoken fear of patterns repeating. One evening, after a grueling deposition that left her hollow, Victoria arrived at the studio unannounced. Key from Charlotte's spare under the mat. The room was dim. Charlotte folding linens, her back to the door. Surprise, Victoria said, voice cracking on the word. Charlotte turned, surprise melting to warmth. But her hug lingered. Tight. You look wrecked. On the table. The massage was different. Charlotte's hands trembling faintly as she worked. Talk to me, she urged, pressing into the small of Victoria's back. Victoria's sigh was a fracture. I'm drowning. Char. The firm wants me in DC for a case next month. 2 weeks. Maybe more. The silence stretched. Charlotte's thumbs stilling. NS? NS, Victoria echoed, turning to pull her down. Their foreheads touching. The kiss was desperate. A plea. Bodies pressing close on the narrow space. But as they moved together, urgency masking doubt, Victoria felt the shadow. The city's demands clawing back. Thanksgiving loomed. The city decking itself in tinsel and lights that twinkled like false promises. Victoria's DC trip stretched to 3 weeks. Depositions dragging in hotel conference rooms that smelled of stale coffee and ambition. She called Charlotte nightly. The connection crackling over miles. Voices bridging the gap with stories of the day. Saw a deer in Rock Creek Park today, Charlotte said one night. Her laugh tinny through the speaker. Reminded me of our hike. Miss you. Victoria paced her suite. The Potomac glittering below like spilled mercury. Miss you more? This city's all suits and secrets. No soul. But soul felt distant. Eroded by emails piling like snowdrifts. By the senior partner's pat on the back that lingered too long. His cologne cloying. She threw herself into work. Winning concessions that earned nods. But each victory tasted ash. Late nights. Alone with room service. She sketched Charlotte's face from memory. Lines softening the edges of longing. Homecoming was a whirlwind. The cab from LaGuardia depositing her at the studio door past midnight. Charlotte waited. Arms open. The embrace fierce. You're here, she breathed. Hands roaming as if to confirm. They tumbled to the table. Linens forgotten. The massage forgotten in favor of skin on skin. Charlotte's mouth was insistent. Mapping collarbones and breasts with a hunger born of absence. Victoria arched. Fingers digging into hips. The release a sob swallowed in kisses. Afterward. Tangled and spent. Charlotte traced the goosebumps on Victoria's arm. Don't leave like that again. Victoria's throat tightened. The promise heavy. I won't. If I can help it. Holiday lights strung the streets as they wandered the village. Hot cider steaming in gloved hands. Charlotte's apartment was a brownstone walk-up in Brooklyn. Bookshelves groaning with wellness tomes and dog-eared novels. Plants thriving in windows that caught the dawn. Victoria stayed over. The queen bed a haven. Mornings lazy with coffee and crossword puzzles traded over sheets. But the firm called. A promotion dangling, managing partner track. With travel that spanned coasts. Victoria agonized in the shower. Steam clouding the glass. Charlotte's shampoo scent mocking her. At dinner. A cozy diner with vinyl booths. She broached it over burgers. Ketchup smudged on her thumb. It's huge, she said. Voice steady but eyes pleading. Stability. For us? Eventually. Charlotte pushed fries around her plate. The clink of fork on ceramic loud. And what about now? You're gone half the time already. I feel like the side plot. The words landed like punches. Victoria's appetite fleeing. You're not. You're the whole story. A pause. Charlotte sigh a bridge. Then prove it. Choose. The argument simmered that night. Words flung like sparks, Victoria's fear of regret. Charlotte's ache for presence. They made up in the dark. Bodies seeking what words couldn't mend. But the rift lingered. A quiet ache. Winter deepened. Snow blanketing the park in hush. Victoria turned down the promotion. The email sent with fingers numb. Her boss's reply a curt acknowledgement that chilled more than the wind. Freedom tasted bittersweet. The firm's halls echoing with whispers of her softening. She surprised Charlotte with tickets to New Orleans. A whim born of cabin fever. The city's jazz and beignet a bomb. The flight south was bumpy. Turbulence mirroring the turbulence within. But Charlotte's hand in hers steadied. Bourbon Street pulsed with brass bands and revelers. The air thick with spice and sin. Their hotel overlooked the Mississippi. Balcony doors opened to the river's murmur. Evenings were walks through the quarter. Hand in hand. Pausing for pralines sticky with sugar. One night. In a dimly lit jazz club. Saxophone wailing like a lover's cry. Charlotte pulled Victoria to the floor. Their sway slow amid the crowd. I love you, Charlotte whispered against her ear. The words muffled by the music but clear as bells. Victoria's heart stuttered. The admission a floodgate. Love you too. God. Char. The confession fueled their nights. Hotel sheets twisted. Bodies exploring with a fervor that chased shadows. Mornings brought café au lait and beignet dust. Laughter over travel mishaps. Like the streetcar that stranded them in the Garden District. But on the flight home, delays stranding them in Atlanta. Doubt crept. Victoria stared at the tarmac lights. Charlotte asleep on her shoulder. What if it's not enough, she murmured to the window. The words lost an engine hum. Back in the city. The new year dawned with fireworks over the bridge. Victoria and Charlotte watching from the rooftop. Champagne flutes clinking. Resolutions whispered, more presents. More art. More us. Victoria enrolled in a painting class in Soho. Canvases splashed with bold strokes that bled emotion. Spring unfurled. Cherry blossoms dusting the park like confetti. Their routine solidified, mornings at Charlotte's. Where yoga mats unrolled to sun salutations. Evenings split between careers. Bridged by texts that crackled with wit and want. Victoria's sketches filled a portfolio. Charlotte's hands easing the kinks of creation. Yet undercurrents stirred. Charlotte's friend, Mia, a fiery photographer, hosted a gallery opening in Chelsea. The space buzzing with artists and agents. Victoria arrived late. Suit rumpled from court. Finding Charlotte surrounded. Laughter bright but eyes scanning for her. Introductions flowed. Mia's gaze appraising. Lawyer. Huh. Steady gig. Char needs that. With her free spirit. The comment rankled. Victoria's smile tight. Later. In the cab. She voiced it. Am I just the anchor? Keeping you from drifting? Charlotte turned. City lights striping her face. No. You're the wind. But the seed planted. Doubts blooming. Victoria threw herself into a pro bono case. Immigrant rights in the Bronx. The injustice fueling her fire. Late nights at the community center. Translating documents. Her passion reignited. But distance grew. One rainy afternoon. Charlotte waited at the studio. Rain sheeting the windows. Victoria burst in. Soaked. Collapsing into the chair. I won, she gasped. Details tumbling out. Charlotte knelt. Towel in hand. Drying her hair. Proud of you. But her touch hesitated. Eyes shadowed. That night? Over takeout in Brooklyn. The dam broke. You're pulling away, Charlotte said. Chopsticks idle. The case? The class? I get it. But I miss us. Victoria's fork clattered. I'm building something real. For us. Us, Charlotte echoed. Voice cracking. Or your redemption. The fight escalated. Words sharp as scalpels, selfishness. Neglect. Fear. Victoria stormed out. Walking the bridge in the downpour. Lights blurring to tears. Hours later. She returned. Key turning soft. Finding Charlotte curled on the couch. Eyes red. I'm sorry, Victoria whispered. Kneeling. Hands framing her face. I love you. Won't lose this. Charlotte pulled her close. Sobs mingling. Promise. They rebuilt slowly. Date nights mandated, picnics in the park. Museum strolls where fingers laced in hushed halls. Summer heat baked the streets. But their bond cooled the burn. Touches lingering. Glances loaded. Yet fate twisted. Charlotte's mother called from Seattle. Illness swift and severe. Come home, the voice pleaded over speakerphone. Charlotte's face paling. Victoria booked flights. The red-eye west a blur of worry. Seattle's drizzle mirrored New York's. But the house was a craftsman in Capitol Hill. Filled with the scent of chamomile tea and old books. Mrs. Ellis was frail. Chemo's toll etched in lines. But her grip on Charlotte's hand was fierce. Victoria stayed. Cooking meals. Holding space as stories unfolded, Charlotte's childhood hikes. Her father's passing young. Nights. In the guest room. They clung. Love-making quiet. Reverent. A shield against the ache. Weeks passed. Remission a tentative dawn. As they flew east. Charlotte slept. Victoria watching clouds. Resolve hardening. Life was fragile. Love the thread. Fall returned. Leaves carpeting the paths where they walked. Hands entwined against the chill. Victoria's firm adapted to her boundaries. Pro bono woven into her role. The balance a hard-won art. Charlotte expanded the studio. Adding workshops on mindfulness. Her energy a beacon. One evening. As twilight bruised the sky, Victoria led Charlotte blindfolded to the park, the path crunching underfoot. "Trust me," she murmured, guiding steps. The blindfold fell at the reservoir's edge, where easels waited, canvas primed, paints arrayed. A small sign read, "Our exhibit. Sketches of their moments, the cabin fire. New Orleans sway. Seattle rain." Charlotte's gasp was a gift. Fingers tracing lines. "You did this. For us," Victoria said, pulling her close. "To remember." Passers-by paused. Smiles shared. The city softening around them. They painted then. Side by side. Colors bleeding into shared space. Laughter echoing. Winter solstice brought a trip south. Key West's Key's a turquoise dream. They rented a cottage on stilts. Waves lapping below. Hammocks swaying in trade winds. Days were snorkeling, reefs alive with color. Nights stargazing. Charlotte's head on Victoria's lap. Stories of futures whispered to the dark. "I want a life with you," Charlotte said one dawn. Conch shell pressed to ear. Ocean's roar mimicking heartbeats. Builds. Travels. All of it. Victoria kissed her palm. Salt lingering. Yes. All. Back north. Commitment deepened. Rings exchanged in a quiet ceremony at the cabin. Friends toasting under strings of lights. Vows simple, presence. Passion. Perseverance. The firm granted sabbatical. Victoria joining Charlotte's retreats. Hands teaching touch. Hearts entwined. Years layered like varnish on canvas. Victoria's gallery show in Soho drew crowds. Her landscapes raw with emotion. Charlotte's portrait central. Eyes alive. The dedication read, "To the hands that freed me." Challenges came, a miscarriage that hollowed them. Nights of tears and tender holds, a move to a loft in Williamsburg. Boxes unpacked with hopes. But each trial forged stronger. Love a flame tempered. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the studio. The table witnessed to beginnings. Charlotte's hands on Victoria's back. Familiar paths. But now with rings glinting. Sighs content. "You changed everything," Victoria murmured, turning into the embrace. Charlotte's gaze held volumes. Green depths endless. "We did." The city outside pulsed on. But in that room, time paused. A canvas complete. Strokes of joy and ache blending to beauty. Life's brush was broad. Unpredictable. But together, they painted bold. Leaving traces of light for whatever came next. In the quiet, they found grace. The human heart's quiet triumph, to love fiercely, and let go only to hold tighter.